and welcome to the Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sophia Onoye, founder and CEO of the Sophia Consulting Firm, a WeBank certified life science marketing and communications consultancy that was established in New York City with the goal of amplifying scientific innovation. The goal of this podcast is to showcase the importance of science advocacy, health equity, and influential leadership through conversations with senior leaders who will share their unique perspectives on their leadership journey, corporate vision, and industry outlook. My guest today is Dr. Ron Cohen, President, CEO, and founder of Acorda Therapeutics, a role that he has held for over 26 years since he founded the company in 1995. Acorda Therapeutics is a public biotechnology company developing therapies for disorders of the nervous system, including Parkinson's disease and migraine. I connected with Ron 2 years ago when I covered the Collaborating for Novel Solutions, more commonly known as the CNS Summit, live in Boca Raton, Florida, following an invitation from the conference's chief curator and chairman, Dr. Amer Kalali. Excitingly, Ron and I have over 480 mutual connections on LinkedIn, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the show, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's wonderful to be here.
It's my absolute pleasure. So I always start the podcast the same way, which is to ask you, what is your definition of scientific innovation?
Well, that's such a big question. I think everyone is going to see it through their own particular lens. And as a physician and not a bench scientist, I take a fairly broad view of that and confining it just to healthcare, because if you start talking about science of all kinds, we'll be here at this time next year discussing it. But if we just talk about healthcare innovation, to me, it really is anything that ultimately improves our ability or the ability of healthcare professionals to improve the lives of patients, full stop. And if that means a novel scientific platform, for example, stem cells or mRNA, that one can then use to launch a whole new generation of therapies that are more effective, more broadly applicable than others had been before, then that's obviously scientific innovation. I think in addition, finding new ways of developing drugs effectively is scientific innovation, whether it's decentralized clinical trials and using digital means and electronic health records and all of the tools that are increasingly at our disposal to accelerate the time to market for therapies that can improve lives, or just to get them to market at all when otherwise they might not have been for lack of the right data, the right trial design, the right execution. So even that is scientific innovation. It's really anything that has not been thought of or reduced to practice before that effectively advances our understanding of disease, of illness, of biology, and enables us to manipulate that or to apply that understanding in a way that improves the lives of our fellow human beings.
Wow, I absolutely love that definition. And it's very patient-centered, and it showcases who you really are, which is a physician at heart. It also ties into my next question, which is what inspired your interest in medicine and your subsequent switch to biotech entrepreneurship?
Well, the interest in medicine, there's a pretty straight line from my dad, who was a neurologist, actually a neuropsychiatrist. He practiced both. And he was on staff at the Neurological Institute at Columbia, I think for over 40 years. And then even then, he continued to practice after he reached mandatory retirement from the medical center at 75. He went to grand rounds every week. He asked questions. He stayed up with the literature, and he continued to practice at his home office until he was 87 years old.
Wow.
And because he had a home office, and because he not infrequently would take me up to the medical center on weekends when he did rounds on his patients, I suspect it was part of his grand master plan to induce me to go into medicine, and apparently it worked.
That's wonderful. And why did you decide then to switch to the biotech field? Like, what inspired that?
Well, I actually I did want to mention that my mother was a magnificent concert violinist. And the reason I didn't become a concert violinist is that I was very far from magnificent at the violin. So getting into biotech was serendipity. I actually had another passion in life, and it wasn't the violin, but it was in the arts, and it was in theater, and primarily musical theater. So I grew up singing and being in shows all my life since I was in first grade, through college, through medical school even. And then even during my residency, I found time during my senior residency year to do a show in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was at UVA. So for me, it was a close call between theater and medicine. And in college, I didn't declare pre-med until junior year, which is very, very late. I had to make up the courses during the summers. Wow. And then right at the end, I sort of flipped. It was medical school, acting school, medical school, acting school. And it was when I realized that there's a truism in medicine that says that the person with the lowest GPA in your medical school class is still called doctor. Whereas actors who can be the finest actors in the world can be waiting tables for 25 years. And so I essentially took the easy way out and went to medical school. So when I got to my residency at University of Virginia in internal medicine, I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved medicine. It was a privilege. It was always a privilege to be able to minister to the sick. And with all due humility and understanding that what we knew how to do and what we know how to do as physicians is a fraction of what people need us to know. And that goes back to our innovation question and the desperate need constantly to be innovating and advancing medical progress. So I was going to do a neurology residency like my dad. And I was about to apply, and I did this show my senior year as a resident because I had a 3-month block of primary care where I had no night call. They were auditioning one of the musicals I always wanted to do. I auditioned, I got the lead, it was the Town Theater, and we did the show. And then we got a really good review. And when I read the review, I thought, you know what? If I can get a review in Charlottesville, I can get a review in New York. I'm going back to New York to be an actor, or at least to try. And that's what I did. I thought I was putting my neurology residency on pause. It turns out I never got back to it because I went back to New York and I was living a dual life for a few years where I was practicing medicine. I was doing emergency medicine. I was doing walk-in clinics, or urgent, what we call urgent care centers now. Back then it was a new thing. And the reason I did that was that, again, I had no night call, so I could do the theater and juggle my schedule. And in fact, I could work 2 or 3 days a week, or even do 2 24-hour shifts in an emergency room, pay the rent, and then audition, take class, and so on. And that's what I did. And I did TV commercials. I did off Broadway. I did student films at NYU Film School. So that's about as far as I ever got. But I had a wonderful experience. And while I was doing it, a couple of friends from my medical school class at Columbia called me one day and said, hey, we have a couple of friends. They're married. They are PhDs. They were at NYU in the same lab, and they just left because they have tissue engineering technology, and they formed a little biotech company, this is in 1986, the very beginning of biotech. And they said, and they asked us to help find them a doctor who could do the clinical things because they're PhDs. And I said, well, why are you calling me? I have no business background. I have no idea about business. Call my brother. He went to Wharton. And they said, well, we thought of you because they specifically wanted a physician who also had presentational skills and experience. And you did theater. So that's why we called you. So you know what? I had no intention of joining a company. I knew nothing about it, but they were my friends. They wanted me to meet them. And I thought, fine, I'm up for anything. I met these two scientists in New York City. They had a little office that they had rented on East 33rd Street, East 34th, East 33rd. And I walked in, spent half a day, and they took me through the science, and I got hooked. They were growing bone marrow in a dish that looked like three-dimensional human bone marrow, and they were going to use it for transplants, and they were going to be using it for other organs like skin and liver. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And they asked me to join them on the spot. And there's a whole story that goes with it. I don't think we have time for it, although it's really funny. But essentially, the woman of the two, her name was Gail Naughton, pulled out an employment agreement from a drawer and pushed it across a desk at me and said, sign here. And I was flabbergasted. And I looked at this employment agreement and it had my name typed in it already. And I just met her that morning. And I said, well, how is my name here? I've been with you all morning. She said, I typed it last night.
Wow. Wow.
And so it was very strange. And it turned out that the friends who had introduced us had sent her a couple of videotapes of me on TV. And based on that, she already decided she was going to work with me. And she was very entrepreneurial, very forceful. And for reasons to this day that I'll never fully understand, she said, sign here. And she pointed at the line and I signed. And I joined this little company. I gave up I thought I was giving up medical practice, the acting. I went to work for this little company. Of course, the joke was I was the fourth or fifth employee, fifth employee. And the funder was a family friend of theirs who was a dentist in Albany, New York, and he was putting in a few $100,000 to keep it going. So after a couple of months, he came to me, he said, Ron, I'm sorry, we have to let you go. And I said, why, Herb? And I said, am I doing a bad job? And he said, no, you're doing a great job. Although honestly, how you would know anyone was doing a great job at that point is beyond me, because we were winging it the entire way. And he said, I can't afford your salary.
Oh, wow.
And instinctively, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, oh, that's fine. I'll work for free. Because I was having a ball. It was so challenging. It was so interesting. The whole idea of taking science out of the lab and putting it into patients was so alluring to me that I just said, I'll work for free. And in fact, for another couple of years, I went back to working emergency rooms on the weekends so I could pay my rent. I wasn't getting a salary, and I was working for this company until we could get funded. And by the way, I decided to audition a couple of times and did one off-Broadway show while I was doing that. But it was exhilarating. And then we found a real CEO from Eli Lilly, a guy named Art Benvenuto, who came in. He became my first mentor in business. He'd come up through commercial. He was really strong. And he moved us to San Diego, kicking and screaming, because I'm a native New Yorker and you just don't do that. And I spent 6 years in San Diego. We took the company public, and ultimately I was running national trials for a skin replacement, a human dermal replacement that we were growing for burn victims. And that was my history of getting into biotech.
Wow, such a beautiful story. I don't know which one to focus on, but serendipity is probably the most important ingredient for innovation. And I love absolutely your journey. I think it's one about creativity, about freedom, and about taking risks, but also enjoying what you do, right? It's not always about the price tag. It's also about the experience for you. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And you hit on my core learning through all this. And when people ask, and younger folks who are trying to get into industry and are thinking about it, that's what I always tell them is, it's age-old wisdom. And if you read a lot, you'll see it. It comes up all the time. And it's because it's true. There are other things that come up all the time that aren't true, especially these days. But this is true, which is do what you're passionate about. Do what turns you on. If you do that, you will be happy. You'll be fulfilled no matter what happens. And and you may very well wind up having all kinds of material success or other success. But if you get up every day and you just are turned on by what you're doing, that's what you want to do. And I think a mistake I've observed people make is that they stick with something knowing they hate it, knowing they don't like it, knowing it's not for them. But intellectually, they're thinking, well, I'll put in my time, I'll pay my dues, I'll do this. And I won't do this other thing that I have an opportunity to do right now because it's too risky, even though I would love it. I think that's a mistake by and large.
Right. Now, it's amazing that you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you what advice you would have for young people that are looking to get into the biotech industry and to become authentic leaders like you, but not just what you've said. I think, through the research that we've done, and I think you and I also connected on Twitter, your Twitter handle at Ron Cohen's hair is truly iconic, and it showcases your authentic leadership. So how are you so bold? Like, where does that come from? Because you're truly inspirational, just listening to you and from what I know about you. But how do you become so bold?
So it started out as an April Fool's joke, actually. So let me be fully transparent, come clean with the audience here. It was less bold than serendipity. So there was, and serendipity, you'll hear me use that word a lot because, again, opportunity knocks. Right. You need to know when it's knocking. You need to recognize it because it knocks not infrequently, and you need to catch it when it knocks and go for it. So in this case, there was a brilliant #1 biotech analyst. He was II #1 every year, a guy named Mark Schoenbaum, who tragically died much too young a few years ago. But when he was in his full glory, he was a brilliant analyst of the biotech industry, of companies. And by the way, he was a physician and a musician as well. I believe he was a violinist. So he got my mom's talent. I didn't. Very unfair. So he and I had a warm relationship. And one day, and he had an impish sense of humor as well. And one day, out of the clear blue sky, he wrote a note about our company, Acorda, my company. And he put my headshot at the top of it, which is almost unheard of. It's extremely unusual in an analyst note. And there was a big red arrow pointing at my hair. And he opened up by saying, my team and I have done a great deal of research, and we can now authoritatively say that we have discovered the CEO in the industry who has the best hair. It's Dr. Ron Cohen. And he put, well, my email lit up, my text lit up, everyone's writing, come on, really? And it just became, because he was so well published, everyone followed him. So everyone knew about him. My investors were calling. So this was in March, I think, of that year. And my head of communications came up to me and said, hey, Ron, we came up with this idea. I wish I could claim the idea, but it was his idea. And he said, I have this idea. We should spoof Mark with a new Twitter handle for you, at Ron Cohen's hair. And I burst out laughing. I said, brilliant, let's do it. Let's do it right now. So we put out a tweet on at Ron Cohen's hair, and we actually took my headshot, removed the face, so it was just an outline, and what was left was the hair. And that you'll see it if you go on at Ron Cohen's hair. You'll see that's my that is my photo. And you talk about lighting up. I had reporters calling and tweeting. I was working out that morning. It was early in the morning, and all of a sudden I see my Twitter feed go off, and it's a reporter who's well known saying, "Is this seriously you?" And and then it got a lot of attention, and I realized it's real, it's fun, it's a bit of an homage to Mark, who I respect and like very much. So why don't we keep it? And so we kept it from there, and it obviously it's a bit distinctive. And then, when he passed away, I actually thought maybe I ought to just go back to something normal, like Dr. Ron Cohen or whatever. And then I thought, you know what, this is a little piece of history in biotech. It's amusing, it's fun, it's human, and it's me. So let's keep it, because one of the other things I've learned is that I forget who said this. There's a wonderful quote, which is, don't take life too seriously. You'll never get out of it alive. And I thought, if it can amuse people a little bit, they see it, brings a little smile, great. And then we can talk about serious things while we're at it.
No, you're exactly right. And thank you. I am laughing so hard, I'm actually crying. And that doesn't usually happen. So I appreciate the humor that you bring. And now I'm going to tap into your scientific brilliance. So can you provide a top-line overview of ongoing work at Acorda?
Well, I'll wind the clock back a little bit very quickly and say, after 6.5 years at my first company, Advanced Tissue Sciences, I was so enthralled by everything I'd learned. And, I learned by doing and making 12 mistakes a day, if not more. And then you just learn. I didn't get an MBA, but I got my practical MBA. And at one point or another, I did pretty much every job in the company, whether it was going under the hood, business development, communications, and clinical regulatory quality and so forth. So I was enthralled by all that, and I decided to go back to neurology in my way, because I always loved neurology. And as I said, where I got it from. And it was such a desperate area of medicine. This is back in 1993, at the end of 93, when I started working on it. We incorporated in 95. It took 1.5 years to set up. But I decided to take everything I'd learned and pour it into a new company that would work on restoring function to people with spinal cord injury, and then ultimately MS, Parkinson's, and other neurological diseases. So we've had quite a journey over the last 25 years. We started out with nothing, and it took 5 years to get venture financing. So I financed it, I bootstrapped, ultimately raised about $8 million in the first 5 years through various means, from individual investors and then a business deal and so on. But it took us 15 years from that point to get our first drug developed and approved. And that was a drug called Ampera, still on the market, and it restores some walking ability. It improves walking ability. I shouldn't say restore, but it improves walking ability for people with multiple sclerosis. So a vital function. It's been incredibly well received. We turned it ultimately into a $600 million a year drug. And then we've put a total of 9 drugs into the clinic in various conditions, including, as I mentioned, Parkinson's, MS, epilepsy, 1 for heart failure, which was a little bit off the beaten track for neurology. 2 of them have so far come out the other side. A few of them just failed outright for various reasons, whether it was safety or efficacy or both. That's the nature of the industry. For every 10 drugs that actually makes it into human trials, it takes about 5,000 molecules, just 1 of which gets to a human. And then 1 in 10 on average make it out to be a developed, approved drug. So we're 2 for 9 now. So we're doing a little bit better than the odds. 3 years ago, we lost our patents on Ampera prematurely, 9 years prematurely, because a judge in Delaware decided to overturn our patents. And that's a whole nother subject about the capriciousness and frankly unfairness of the whole patent system and the way it's adjudicated. I should mention the same patents were upheld in Europe, which gives you a sense of the arbitrariness of the system. So we lost the patents. We lost most of our revenue from the drug. So we've had to restructure a number of times since then. But fortunately, we got a Parkinson's drug, which is an inhaled form of levodopa that came out of Bob Langer's lab at MIT. It is a vital drug for people with Parkinson's whose medicines wear off before their next dose, and then they go back with their symptoms. for an hour, sometimes hour and a half or more, and there's nothing they can do. So it's a desperate way to live when they have a lot of these going on, or even a few can be very disruptive. And this is an inhaled form that begins to get them out of it within 10 minutes. So we launched that at the March of 2019. And of course, we were out for a year. We had all kinds of reimbursement issues, other issues, just to get our footing. We started getting our footing. Things looked like they were really coming back. And then COVID hit. Yeah. So we're still struggling with that, but the drug is out there. We get lots of grateful patients talking about it. And actually, even Ampera has held up against generic competition better than you would have expected, better than most people expected. And it's because we have always taken very seriously that everyone in this company is practicing medicine. And I tell that to everyone, I don't care what your title is. You can be on the administrative staff, you can be a lawyer, you could be in finance. But I tell everyone, consider that you're practicing medicine with all of the privilege, but also responsibility that entails. And that means you always think about what is the best for the patient. It doesn't mean you always get to the ideal, because given our system and its complexities, you can't. But you do your best to try and to inform your decisions, keeping that in mind, along with the other many, sometimes conflicting responsibilities that you have as a public company.
Wow. I mean, extremely well said. I think even going on your website, I remember I saw that you adhere by the policies of bio in terms of diversity and inclusion, but even bigger than that. So obviously your company is headquartered here in New York State, which of course is a growing biotech cluster. But what can we as a New York life science community do to ensure greater representation of women and minorities in senior leadership positions as well as company boards?
Wow, I don't know an easy answer to that. You know, on some level, actually on a major level, it needs to be done locally with every company, every leadership team and CEO, every board of directors needs to get religion, if you will, about this. It's a lot better than it used to be. When I served as chair of the board at BIO, which is the Biotech Innovation Organization, I created the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of BIO. And that is going strong. We've had a number of initiatives really to help do exactly what you're saying, which is to spread the gospel of diversity and prompt action on the part of companies in our industry, really to take it seriously. Because again, if you just think about it a little, you realize we're all practicing medicine at the highest possible level of innovation, of providing the newest, the best, the greatest new therapies in a continual way and a progressive way to patients. Those patients are diverse. It's the whole population. It's everyone. And the talent pool that we draw from has to be equally diverse, because talent is everywhere. And frankly, you know, you have all these different communities of people out there who identify in different ways. They may all identify as Americans, which is wonderful. They may all identify as human beings, but then they also identify in, you know, as women, as people of color, as people of different gender preferences, different sexual preferences, whatever it is. If we are serious about reaching those people, including a diverse and representative population in our clinical trials, commercializing our drugs so that they all can benefit from them, don't we need to be informed about what is specifically important to those communities, not just what is generally important to everybody? And the only way you really get at that is to have those representatives in your company who are passionate about your company's mission and passionate about bringing it to those communities from which they arose.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, extremely well said. And I like the continuity between your work at BIO and what you instill in your own company and what you also amplify to the external world, right? So you have to think globally, right? But act locally. It starts with whatever company policy that people would adopt.
I don't think, it's hard to mandate. You can mandate some of it. California has their rule about, a certain number of percent of women on the board. I actually don't think that's such a bad idea, because there are times at the beginning of a movement that ultimately is taken to be routine, but is very far from routine in the beginning. Sometimes you need a kickstart. Sometimes you need to force people to experience it. And the trick is, how do you do it in such a way where you don't build so much resentment that it's counterproductive? So it's a bit of a balancing act. At the end of the day, I think we in the industry, and particularly the leadership of the industry, have a lot of responsibility here to go out and get our fellow companies or fellow leaders to understand this and to practice these things.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dr. Michelle McMurray, who is, of course, the CEO of Bio, she was a guest on the podcast last year, and she actually emphasized that diversity of thought as being integral to innovation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, I just have two questions. I'll call it a question and a half. So are there any emerging technologies that you're excited about, and why? Maybe two or three.
I've got recency bias and selection bias, because there is so much that is exploding, whether it's bispecific antibodies, particularly in cancer. Obviously, mRNA, which is now, with the COVID pandemic, has come to the fore. But even in mRNA, there's progress now with circular mRNA, and that's going to, presumably last longer and be more effective. You've got RNA interference, such as the drugs that Alnylam is producing, which already are showing tremendous advantages. Let's just take a big disease area that they've addressed, which is their PCSK9 drug, inclisiran, to lower cholesterol, one shot every 6 months. You don't have to remember to take pills and so on. It's mind-boggling. Stem cell therapies, CAR T cell therapies. We're learning, just this last week, there was a remarkable report from a Vertex-sponsored N of 1 trial in a man with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, who appears to have been cured by injecting insulin-creating cells that were created in a lab out of pluripotent stem cells. If that holds up, and even if this one doesn't hold up, it's almost there. It's coming. CRISPR for gene therapy, and all of the children of CRISPR that are coming. I could go on, but I started out in the industry when there wasn't even the results of the human genome. In fact, there was no human genome project. In 1986, this was beyond. It wasn't until the early 90s that monoclonal antibodies took off. And when they did, there were two spectacular failures in the industry in clinical trials that took down all the companies that were trying to do monoclonal antibodies, and people gave up on them, right? Well, what's pretty much the most commonly used or developed therapy right now? It's monoclonal antibodies of one kind or another. So that's the nature of progress. And what we're seeing now, after the Human Genome Project in 2000, 2001, when we first sequenced the human genome at a cost of whatever it was, billions of dollars and years of effort, now you can sequence an entire genome in what, an hour, a couple of hours? It's going to be down to 10 minutes before you know it. So the pace of innovation in our industry has been logarithmic. It's been logarithmic. That wasn't always the case, but it is now. And I can guarantee that in 5 years, if we have this conversation, I'll be giving you a whole new laundry list of my favorite therapies.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of innovation. As you stated earlier, it's dynamic. And that's why ultimately we ought to measure it in terms of the impact to our patients. And at some point in the spectrum of our lives, we're either patients or caregivers. So we should continue to pay attention to scientific innovation. So, so my final question for you is very simple. Do you have any other commentary or thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I have a lot, but we don't have time. I would leave it by saying that that when I got out of medical school and my residency, I never dreamed that this was going to be my career. It didn't even exist when I was in medical school. So I guess I would go back to something I said earlier, which is, if I had to distill everything I've ever done into one lesson, just one, it would be wait for opportunities, learn to recognize when they are there. You'll know it if you listen to it. It's not here, actually, or if it is here, it's here, which is in your right brain, but what we more normally call down here, our gut.
Right.
There's a gut call that in life frequently we're called to make, whether it's on a mate, whether it's on a career, whether it's what house to buy or where to live. Some of the bigger decisions, whether to have kids, how to raise them, some of the bigger decisions are not left brain calls. They are gut calls, they are right brain calls. And very often those of us who have been trained in science, trained in medicine, we tend to favor the left brain very often, which is the analytic side. Very important, critical to innovation, critical to everything. So is this side. The creative, imaginative part, the gut part, the emotional part is equally, if not more, critical to innovation, but also to how you live your life. Whether you are passionate about what you're doing when you get up in the morning has very little to do with the formula that you're working out in your head. It has all to do with just this gut feeling that, oh my goodness, I can hardly wait to get back to doing this.
Wow.
Look for that.
Wow. Well, thank you. I think, growing up in Nigeria, I had a gut, and my gut was for amplifying scientific innovation. Now, I didn't know what it was called, but I followed that, and I'm so glad that I did, because it allowed me to meet people like you. You're not only inspirational and creative and brilliant and all that, but you have such an excellent sense of humor and is humbled in this gratitude for life and for people. And I feel like I could talk to you from now until next year, which would be impossible. But I thank you so much for the generosity of your time and for the wise words that you've shared here with us today.
Well, thank you, Sophia. And if in closing, one more point I want to make to the audience, I do want to point out, because some of you are looking and going, did he buy that? And is it important art? And it's critically important art. And I want you to know that I think one of my daughters, when she was 6 or 7, painted this specifically for me.
Oh.
And she asked me if I would hang it up in my office. And I told her I couldn't think. Over here, you've got sort of the company related things and some of the awards and things. But right behind my desk, you have this, because I couldn't think of anything more important that you would want to put up in your office.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think the beauty of the pandemic in some ways, it allows us to share parts of ourselves that were previously hidden. So thank you for sharing that important story with us and for everything. Now, the only thing I wish you could have done a better job of is the violin skills, but I'm sure you could pick that up much later on in life.
I'm so sorry you brought that up, Sophia, but thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and I appreciate your time. Have a good one, okay?
You too. Bye now.